Hi everybody, I'm the man from Vin Diesel's The Wheelman, and welcome back to yet another edition of obscure and forgotten PS1 games, the never-ending series where we dive into the weird and wonderful library of the original PlayStation. As always, we're going to play a selection of 3 games chosen at random by the immortal entity known as the Wheel of Games, and also one game chosen by the not-so-immortal, but still rather important entity known as the Viewer Wheel, where all the options are submitted by you, the lovely viewers. So let's not waste any more time. I've got a fever, and the only prescription is more randomly selected PS1 games. So strap right in and let the wheel provide.
The wheel will provide.
Kicking things off, we have Blockids, which I only know how to say correctly thanks to the PAL box art highlighting the letters for me. Also, this box art is terrible. This game is a very late release on the console, well, in the West anyway. Blockids made it to North American shelves in 2003, while in PAL regions it took until summer 2004 for this game to see a release. As for Japan, well, Blockids here originally came to the PlayStation all the way back in February of the year 1996, meaning this game took over 7 years to make it to the West. And what did we get? Well, we got 3D Breakout, aka Arkanoid, aka Alleyway, aka Blockids, I guess. Yes, this is an updated take on the classic paddle versus block formula. You move your paddle, deflect the ball, and aim to take out every block on the field to earn points and move on to the next level. I'm sure we've all played at least one variant of this in our lifetime, and admittedly, I have quite a soft spot for this style of game, as limited as it is. I've spent many a car ride heavily invested in some Alleyway on my Game Boy, so hey, let's see if Blockids here can still offer a twist to the formula and dish up some nostalgic fun. Now, first things first, the Western release of this game was published by Natsume in what I can only assume was a budget release. There wasn't exactly a high demand for PS1 games at the time, let alone Japanese block breakers from the mid-90s, but it's an easy title to bring over at least, so yeah, why not? The game itself was developed by a company called Athena, who I'm mostly familiar with thanks to their Daisymon series, a collection of game builders that allow you to create your own shoot-em-ups using a collection of pre-built tools. Think like an RPG maker for shmups, and yeah, you've got the right idea. They also made this arcade game that I quite like called JJ Squawkers, which, yes, is as strange as it looks. Now, considering Athena's pedigree for shoot-em-ups and weird bird games, you'd think Athena might try add some cool twists to the classic Breakout formula, and they most certainly did. We now have jumping balls and terrible 3D camera angles. Also, you fight a boss from time to time. That part's pretty fun. Now, before we get into the gameplay and modes, let's talk briefly about the control options. Now, you can of course use a standard gamepad like I decided to do, but the game also supports the PlayStation mouse if you're so inclined. And for those who like things a little bit more traditional, the Japanese version also supports the rare Namco volume controller, and there's even a special edition of the game that comes packaged with this controller too. Now, needless to say, I do not have this fine piece of gaming history in my possession, so there's no way to test if it works with the Western releases of the game, but I can't see why it shouldn't. Anyway, modes wise, we have a grand total of 2. Adventure mode and challenge mode. Adventure mode represents the main single player content in the game. You choose from one of 6 colourful characters and then take on a series of 50 levels with the hopes of beating the big bad guy at the end. And you know what? This most certainly is Breakout. The goal is to remove all blocks on the field level by level until you make it to a boss fight every 10 levels. Here you take out a dragon of some sort and then you do it all over again for another 10 levels. Sometimes the backgrounds and music change, your opponent will update every now and then, and the dragons also sometimes change colour. Although for some reason 2 of them are green, albeit slightly different shades of green, I will give him that. And then at the very end the dragon becomes a spoopy mask, and there you go, you've beaten adventure mode. Now, I'm not gonna lie, getting to the end of the 50 levels isn't exactly easy given how tough some of the level patterns can be. Losing balls can be very easy thanks to how fast the balls can get, and you've also got a limited number of continues too. You will of course get items that help and hinder you, things like slowing and speeding up your paddle, growing or shrinking it, and making it move in and out across the different axes, all that good stuff. Lucky folks may even come across the odd life, and those who are really lucky might spawn a star pickup which lets you end the level immediately. I can't imagine that would be great for score hunters, but if you don't care like me, then this is pretty great. There's also this bar under your character that fills up as you hit consecutive blocks, and once it's full, your paddle grows in size temporarily, and yeah, that's about it. So far this is all pretty standard stuff for a Breakout clone, but of course, the big selling point of Blockids, at least in 1996 anyway, was that it was in 3D, which means the ability to change camera angles, blocks stacked vertically on top of one another, and the ability to make the ball jump at any time by pressing the X button, handy for both getting higher blocks and crucially getting behind the blocks, allowing you to clear huge amounts in a single strike. Now for me personally, even with the adjustments to the gameplay to cater to the extra dimension involved, this still very much felt like regular old Breakout, only a little bit worse. Out of the 4 available camera angles, only 2 of them I would actually consider usable. The ones that show off the visuals the most are not so good for actually playing the game, and of the 2 that do work, the top view is by far the best for keeping an eye on the ball, and looking at it this way, well, it's just regular old Breakout, isn't it? Only now there's also layered blocks that you can't really see. And jumping, while often useful, can also be detrimental in some cases too, causing you to lose a ball if you mistime your button presses. Honestly, Blockids at its core is a good playing game of Breakout, but the additions and tweaks that have been added here are at best unoriginal and uninteresting, and at worst, useless and just kind of annoying. The game's 50 levels will probably take a little over an hour to get through, and while it does offer up a good challenge and the boss fights are a nice change from time to time, I just felt a little bit bored about halfway through, which is quite the shame really. But hey, what about the challenge mode then? Maybe things will look a little bit better. Well, it's more of the same really, only with harder levels, so yeah, your mileage may vary. And yeah, that's about all there is to Blockids really. It's a very basic Breakout clone that has a few new ideas, but unfortunately some pretty poor execution. It will still probably offer something to fans of the genre thanks to some solid fundamentals and the variety of control options, and an admittedly cute, if low-key presentation. Some of the character animations are pretty fun, and I do really get a kick out of those low-poly dragon bosses. Also, the music can be pretty catchy too. I don't know how music almost always ends up being a highlight in these games, but seriously, Japanese composers were on their A game during this generation. So yeah, a nice curio that somehow made it to the West, and maybe one worth picking up for fans of the genre, but otherwise Blockids is a very basic, inoffensive, and entirely skippable Breakout clone. Unless you like fighting ghosts as a mermaid, I guess. Not many games let you do that, to be fair.
The wheel will provide.
Next up we have Warpath, Jurassic Park, which made its way to the PlayStation in winter of the year 1999. And would you believe it, this is also somebody's pick on the viewer wheel. So, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for another default winner, Gino746. You did it and you didn't even have to try.
Default!
Alright, so dinosaurs, I think we can all agree, are pretty rad. Fighting games, also pretty rad. Jurassic Park, if we ignore some of the movies, the most recent one in particular, I'd say is also pretty rad. So naturally, if we take all these cool parts and combine it into one game, we get Warpath, Jurassic Park, a dinosaur fighting game. Now the history of dinosaur fighting games is a bit of a strange one. Once upon a time, they were all the rage, quite literally, thanks to a little game called Primal Rage, which, let's be fair, if you think of a dinosaur fighting game, chances are this is what your mind will wander to. It's a game I always remembered for its visuals rather than the fighting itself, which was a little rough, I'm not gonna lie. But if we're talking rough, we of course need to give a shout out to the OG dinosaur fighting game and inspiration for Primal Rage, the amazing, the incredible, the impeccable Dino Rex. Yeah, it's not very good, but the dinosaurs are pretty fat in this game, and really, that's all that matters. Now unfortunately, since then, the dinosaur fighting genre has kind of floundered a little bit. Sure, we have dinosaurs making appearances in fighting games like Killer Instinct and Gone and Tekken, I guess. But considering how cool a premise the dinosaur fighting game is, it's a shame we've never seen it explored more. Enter Warpath Jurassic Park, the game that aims to take dinosaur fighting into the realms and arenas of 3D. And who was at the helm? Well, it's none other than Black Ops Entertainment, who just so happened to appear in our last volume with the game Black Dawn. So if you're watching these back to back, that should hopefully line up quite nicely. So first things first, let's talk about the gameplay on offer. What we have here is a 1v1 dinosaur fighter that thankfully happens to play quite similarly to most 3D fighters of the time. You can jump, crouch, move in and out of the screen, and use a variety of punches and kicks, or in this case, head and tail attacks. Yes, in this game, instead of light and heavy punch, it's light and heavy head, and instead of light and heavy kick, it's light and heavy tail. Probably a good thing considering the length of a T-Rex's hands and also the likeliness that it will fall over if it tries to kick anything. Your dinosaurs have access to bread and butter fighting commands like throws, launchers, counters, special moves, and even full combo strings that have like 8 or 9 inputs, showing you why you really shouldn't throw hands with a beast from the Cretaceous period. Finally, each dinosaur also has access to a special rage move that can be activated once you fill up this meter. Now you can fill up this meter by doing combos or by taunting using the R2 button. Once your meter is full, you just gotta hold R2 and press any of the face buttons and well, it'll likely be lights out for your opponent. You'll love to see it. So in general, Warpath actually plays it quite safe with its fighting, giving you a pretty familiar and easy to grasp combat system, only the gimmick is that you're using this system to control big, hulking prehistoric beasts, and really, that's where the game comes into its own. Now I think it's fair to say Warpath isn't the tightest and most fluid fighting game around. You'll likely be able to tell that while playing it, and I also think you can tell that by simply looking at it in motion. But in spite of that, Warpath really sells itself off of how weighty and crunchy the act of pitting dinosaurs against each other is. Smashing a tail into a T-Rex, taking a big bite out of a raptor, and then there's whatever the hell this guy is doing, which is actually quite vicious really. Warpath is out here trying to sell you on one thing, and it's dinosaurs beating the hell out of one another, and it most certainly does that quite well. I also love the little gimmick of these fodder creatures running around the arenas where if you eat one mid-fight, you actually regain a little bit of health, which is extra funny with the humans by the way. Just make sure not to eat the dog. You'll feel really bad if you eat the dog, trust me. Modes wise, the game is actually quite generous too. You've of course got your arcade mode where you play in a series of fights against each of the playable dinosaurs in game. You start with 8 dinosaurs in the beginning, but as you play through arcade mode with each of the characters, you'll begin unlocking one of 6 new dinosaurs, who each come with their own new stage as well, which we love to see. Now, unfortunately, beating arcade mode doesn't unlock you any cool Tekken-style cinematics, but it does unlock additional modes, like survival mode, where you can get new colors for your dinosaurs, and also a choice mode, which isn't actually anything too exciting since it just lets you pick a stage, but hey, it's something. Rounding out the modes, we've got team battle for multiplayer and even a pretty decent practice mode. Clearly, in spite of the silliness of the premise, Black Ops still took this seriously and gave the game more options than you'd see in some modern fighting games. I mean, if you want to practice the frame data of your T-Rex, well then you go right ahead. Also, I have to give a shout out to the excellent museum feature, which teaches you about the various selectable dinosaurs and thankfully has a very helpful voiceover, so even dummies like me can learn how to actually pronounce certain dinosaurs' names.
Pachycephalosaurus, or thick-head lizard, was a plant-eating bipedal dome-headed dinosaur, roughly 6 meters long and 3 meters high.
See, it's like having Ross from Friends right there in the room with you. Now, as for visuals and presentation, I think overall this is a pretty great looking game. The dinosaurs look really nice and the overall Jurassic Park theming is also pretty great too. Some of the arenas are certainly better and fuller than others, but I'd go as far to say that it's one of the better looking fighters on the system. I especially love the location based damage that appears on the dinosaurs after taking big hits. It really just ups the viciousness of the whole thing. The game even runs at 60 FPS. Well, it tries to. You will see some sharp drops every now and then, but it does manage to hit 60 most of the time, so, you know, fair play to it. Now, some of you might be wondering about the size differences between the dinosaurs, and yes, I feel like there might be some slight liberties taken with the scale of these things, which honestly is fine for a dinosaur fighting game. You wouldn't want to see a tiny raptor fighting a T-Rex, would you? Well, actually, that might be pretty fun, but hey, supposedly the raptor in this game isn't a velociraptor, but a megaraptor, which is not only a much bigger raptor, but also a real thing apparently. As for the sound, well, one of my favorite things about this game is hands down the sound effects. If you want to sell a fighting game like this, you're going to want big hits and loud dinosaur screams, and let me tell you, they deliver them here. It probably helps that they have DreamWorks and Spielberg involved, so finding some convincing dinosaur sound files probably wasn't too much trouble. The music, on the other hand, is kind of disappointing honestly, especially considering that we've got Michael Giacchino on soundtrack duty. We once again see his orchestral style prevalent in previous DreamWorks games like The Lost World and Small Soldiers, but it just kind of feels a little subdued here. Maybe it's the recording quality or the compositions themselves, but they were just kind of fine really. Good for dinosaur fighting I suppose, but you know, not much else. And that's a look at Warpath Jurassic Park, which, to be perfectly honest, is a fun little video game. It takes me back to a time where you'd get all these wonderful hardcore fighters, your Street Fighters, Virtual Fighters and Tekkens, but also these great B-tier fighters with dumb video game gimmicks, no balance whatsoever, functional but unrefined combat that are just fun to play. Games that you'll never see at an official tournament, but would have turned the party back at your cousin's house when you were like 10 years old, you know? Warpath is a great, silly, B-tier fighting game. Don't go in expecting a deep fighter experience, but do go in expecting a game where dinosaurs knock the crap out of each other in front of a 76 garage for your entertainment. And well, you shouldn't be disappointed.
the wheel will provide.
RC to go!
Kicking off the second half of this volume is RC Day Go, making its way to the PlayStation in September of the year 2000. And if the opening movie didn't give it away, this is an RC car racing game, and not just any RC racing game, but we've got ourselves an arcade RC racing game, courtesy of the coin-op legends over at Taito. These guys sure do like popping up a lot in these videos, don't they? This is actually a game that I picked up not too long ago because it was pretty cheap and looked quite cool, but I've never actually found the time to sit down and play it, so yeah, what better time than now, I suppose. Now, those familiar with Taito might have heard of their Day Go series of arcade games, the most popular of which is probably the train simulator Densha Day Go, or maybe even the flight sim Jet Day Go. They also developed Dino Rex, by the way. Seriously, what can't these guys do? Well, it may not come as a surprise to you that RC Day Go aims to do the same thing as their previous simulation games, but with radio-controlled cars. The Day Go series is all about creating a hybrid of simulation and arcade-style gameplay, something that is both accurate and respectful of its source material, but offers up easy pick-up-and-play gameplay for people of all ages. So in other words, this is a proper radio-controlled racing game rather than just an RC-themed racer like Revolt or Tyco RC. The gameplay here is meant to simulate racing an RC car from the perspective of the driver looking down on the track. It's kind of a throwback to the likes of classic games like RC Pro-Am and Rock and Roll Racing in a way, but at the same time, it's nice to actually kind of experience a racing game that also feels like you're looking in at a cool hobby. Well, that's assuming it's any good, so yeah. Let's find that out. So for clarity, this is actually a port of a game that first appeared in arcades in '99 called Go by RC. Now this isn't exactly a straight port, as the PS1 version here is a little more consoleized, and the arcade version also had a cool custom RC receiver for its controller, but the gameplay, cars, majority of tracks, these are all taken from the arcade version, so yeah, it is more or less the same experience. Now when you boot up the game, you'll see a few standard options like practice, quick race, championship, and time attack mode. Now the only two modes I'm going to focus on here are the practice and championship mode, since the other two are pretty self-explanatory. Now practice mode is actually just the game's tutorial, which brings you through a series of quick challenges explaining the basic controls and nuances of the gameplay. Now seeing as it's an arcade game, controls are kept relatively simple. You've got a button to accelerate and brake, as well as the ability to boost by pressing the L1 or R1 button. The boost is pretty much unlimited, but using it at inopportune times can easily cause you to crash into a wall, so it does require some restraint, let's just put it that way. As for turning, well, it is very much that. You turn your car to the left or right. If you played any top-down racer before, you'll know exactly how this plays, but either way, it's very simple to get to grips with and feels really good in motion. So now that we know how to play, let's move on to the main single player content, the championship mode. In this mode, we're out to win the prestigious T-Cup Open, the biggest event in RC racing. Unfortunately though, we're starting out with a basic bottom of the barrel RC car, although you do get to choose between 3 different types and a custom body of your choice, which yes, might look quite familiar to fans of 90s rally cars. Also, big shout out for the attention to detail on some of these models. This is some top tier stuff. Now to beat the game, we've got to come first in all 14 tournament races, which are split across 2 distinct classes, on-road and off-road. Now you can actually enter any of the 14 races from the get-go, but suffice to say, you won't be winning any of the tougher races in your crappy little rally car, that's for sure. We need to upgrade to the bear, or ambulance, or chicken to do that, which means we gotta upgrade our car. But how do we do that, you ask? Well, by winning low tier races, earning some cash, and then heading to the shop to kit out our car for tougher challenges. Or, you know, changing your tires because you're racing on dirt or snow from time to time. It's actually more or less the formula to the Choro Q series, well, the racing part anyway. I can't imagine we'll be driving around a city in RC cars anytime soon, even if that would be kinda cool. Enter a race, win some cash, buy better parts, enter a harder race, win that one, buy some better parts, and so on and so forth until you win the game. Thankfully, even if you lose races, you still end up earning quite a large amount of cash, so even with the odd difficulty spike from time to time, it never really requires too much grinding or replaying of any of the tracks. The game is also nice enough to throw you some bonus car bodies from time to time as well, so even though there is a great selection of car bodies to buy in the shop, you can mix things up and still save some money for that god tier suspension. Now while the gameplay eases you in nicely and you can usually outscale most of the races just by upgrading your parts, the game does offer up a pretty steep challenge towards the ladder races, which is not only down to the AI, but the track design and speed of the game as well, getting pretty intense, requiring you to master shifting between braking, accelerating and dashing to scrape out a win. And that's with a fully upgraded car, by the way, so don't think you can just grind your way to the championship. You're gonna have to bring the skills too. The tracks themselves are set to replicate the style of tracks you would see in actual RC races, meaning the goal here is simulation over video gaminess, I suppose. No future or sewer themed tracks, just raceways in the park and cute woodland areas with ponds and stuff. And there's also ramps from time to time. Can't forget those. Now that's not to say the game itself doesn't look great, with colourful lush environments, highly detailed textures and car models, and a rock solid 60 FPS frame rate. This right here is a gorgeous PS1 game that doesn't sacrifice any of the high-speed gameplay that the arcade original offers. Well, except for maybe not having the cool RC controller, but come on, it's pretty close. On the sound front, well, it's usually safe to assume good things when Taito is involved, and I'm happy to say it's a banger. The game features some realistic RC car noises, as well as some less realistic joke noises for certain bodies, and of course, there's plenty of everybody's favourite arcade classic, an overly enthused 90s announcer.
Still early in the race. Now start making your way to the front of the pack.
Music-wise, the game is offering us a mixture of funky beats in the menus and some high-octane rock for the races, some of which are very, very upbeat, and some of which even have vocals, which, you know, enhances every arcade racer, in my opinion.
Midway through the race, stay cool and try to improve your position. Third lap. Third lap. A pool of water.
So yeah, all in all, RC Day Go succeeds at being both a fun little arcade racer, as well as a decent simulation of the RC car experience, albeit simplified quite a bit, but still, the racing perspective, legit tracks and sponsors, as well as picking out and upgrading parts of the car, goes the extra steps to impress fans of the hobby. Although that being said, while I appreciate the game's arcade roots, I also think it ends up holding the game back from its full potential. In spite of the number of races and all the shopping you can do, you can unlock pretty much everything in this game, the parts, the bodies, win all the races in maybe a little over an hour, which is in no part thanks to the average race taking a little over a minute to complete. 4 laps on short tracks is fun, no doubt, but boy, does it go by fast. So even though the game has all these additional components that would be ideal for a longer, more fleshed out single player experience, you kind of just run through it so fast. Of course, a lot of this stuff was added to kind of consolize the arcade experience somewhat, but it doesn't really add much content on from the arcade original, meaning it's a fun but ultimately quite shallow experience, which is like most arcade games to be fair, but you know, it sucks in this case because you can really see the lost potential if they flesh it out a little bit more and extended it with some more content. Also, the game doesn't have a 2-player mode either, which is always a bummer. Anyway, even with the game's slim amount of content, there's no denying there is a lot of fun to be had with RC Day Go. Its style of racing certainly won't be for everybody, but it manages to freshen up a classic genre of racer and give it both a classy simulation sheen as well as some 90s arcade style, making it one of the more eye-catching choices for racing fans on the console. Just go in with the right expectations and you'll no doubt leave with a big smile on your face. I mean, how could you not after crushing all your opponents in an RC tank, am I right?
Midway through the race, get after the other. Third lap.
You will provide.
Closing things out for Volume 12, we have our viewer selection, and it is the wonderfully named 1997 release, Spider the Video Game, which is called that so we know it's 100% the official video game for spiders by, spiders. This game was chosen for us by the lovely Rain Pulse, and I gotta say, this is a game I'd hope would pop up sooner rather than later, almost entirely because of this box art. One of the all-time greats in video gaming. I mean, a spider with a knife and a shotgun. Sign me up. Also, in case the name didn't give it away, this game will feature a spider pretty predominantly, so if that gives you the heebie-jeebies, apologies in advance, but if it makes you feel better, I'm terrified of wasps and they put them in this game too, so everybody's a loser really. Now, full disclosure, Spider is another game that I own but haven't played for a very long time, but I did remember liking it back in the day. Although once again, I'm not really sure if that's down to the box art or not, but hey, let's see how it holds up 25 years after its original release. Oh, Jesus Christ, I'm getting old. So first off, Spider comes from a developer by the name of Boss Game Studios, who almost exclusively made racing games on the N64. They were actually the studio tasked with developing the original Forza Motorsport, but unfortunately closed before that ever came to fruition. Now when I say they almost exclusively made N64 racers, the one exception is of course Spider, their first and only PS1 game. This right here is a pretty traditional platforming game in the 2.5D style, which of course means 3D models and environments, but all of our movement and gameplay takes place on a flat 2D plane. Supposedly the developers wanted to make a fun video game, so opted for the classic 2D style versus full 3D. And I mean, considering the quality of 3D platformers prior to Mario 64 and Crash Bandicoot, that might have been a safe bet actually. Of course, this isn't your usual 2.5D platformer. The big gimmick here is that you're a spider, and as such, you get to experience all the fun things that come along with being one, like being really small, using your web, and throwing a boomerang at other spiders. Okay, that last one might seem a little bit odd, but there is a reason for it. Kinda. So one of the highlights of Spider for me is the story and premise. Now, it's nothing too deep or complicated, but it is kind of insane, which you love to see. So the game takes place in this futuristic cyberpunk world with corporations waging war over technology, and you take the role of this scientist who works on nano insects who can be equipped with tools and weaponry, which is pretty cool, right? Well, this scientist has also developed the ability to transfer his consciousness into the robots and take control of them. And I bet you see where this is going. So, getting wind of this tech, a rival company sends out a hit squad to steal the technology, which involves shooting it up and also killing our player character. Bit extreme, but okay. Well, thankfully, right before being shot up, our scientist manages to transfer his brain into this spider, and thus begins our tale of revenge, where one man trapped inside a tiny robot spider hunts down his killers. Seriously, this game has a bunch of cutscenes too, and they are almost all of the spider just stalking behind the folks who killed him. It's so stupid, but so good. Anyway, wacky premise aside, this game mostly just tries to emulate the traditional platformer experience, but as a spider. This of course means there will be plenty of jumping over platforms and hazards, but also crawling on walls and ceilings, and also your singular web ability, which allows you to hang down from ceilings to reach items and swing to reach far out platforms. It's nothing too exciting, certainly less spider abilities than Spider-Man, for example, but the small environments and solid core spider abilities do help emulate the traditional spider experience, I guess you could say. Then again, you also gotta remember, we are a cyber spider, which means we can also pick up various weapons from missiles, flamethrowers and mines, to smart bombs, electric blasts and boomerangs. Seriously though, the boomerang is actually the best weapon in the game, so don't skip out on it. Your spider can find these weapons littered around the individual levels, and each weapon is broken down into one of two classes, front leg or back. You can equip up to 4 weapons at a time, 2 on your front legs and 2 on your back legs, with each side featuring its own dedicated attack button, and these can also be swapped through freely at any time using the shoulder buttons, which is always handy. So yeah, in many ways a very traditional 2.5D platformer. It's actually very similar to the original Pandemonium, which did release around the same time. Just replace fantasy lands and people with a spider and shrunk environments, and there you go. Now the game is broken into 6 chapters, which sees you follow your murderers from your lab all the way through the city, the sewers, a museum, and even another lab, but an evil lab this time around. You move through the levels one by one in a linear fashion using a level select screen, not too unlike the Mario Tree classic, and in each level you're tasked with reaching a microchip at the end. Now these microchips are your main collectible and essentially act as your stars or crystals or whatever video game MacGuffin is needed in this particular world. To move on to the next world, you need to collect a set number of microchips, and while some levels in this game only feature a single microchip and are for the most part entirely linear, some levels in this game can house multiple microchips, which means you'll actually end up playing levels multiple times, searching out hidden areas or exploring completely different paths, which gives the game's levels a more open feel, really promoting using those spider abilities to think outside the box and go where no mere mortal dare travel. They even have a shield power-up that's almost entirely used to get you through dangerous locations to reach hidden microchips. The shield is kinda trash otherwise, but hey, at least it's good for something. Now this does mean you'll end up playing levels multiple times, which might seem like a way to pad the game out a bit, and truthfully, it kinda is, but the levels are generally very short and can take on average anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes to beat, and to its credit, the alternate paths do usually feature a lot of new sections, so you are at least getting some new content upon each playthrough. Of course, if you want to avoid revisiting levels, you can also unlock bonus levels, which don't just feature a ton of items and weapons to collect, but also an easy microchip to bag too. Although to get these, you've got to seek out these CD pieces hidden within the regular levels, which ain't always the easiest thing to do, but come on, you'll miss out on the weird 70s level otherwise, and you can't be having that now. Thankfully, the game also features some boss fights too, and while I'd like to see more than just the 3 that appear here, they are pretty fun to fight and feature some really eye-catching and disgusting designs. Seriously, what the hell is going on with this thing? I mean, I kinda love it, but still, Jesus. Now I will say, for the most part, Spider is a pretty enjoyable game, but it's also important to highlight that it's got some kinks as well, most notably around its difficulty, because Spider is very, very hard. Part of it is due to the game being quite difficult by design, but also a lot of it comes down to some early 2.5D teething issues, and a whole lot of jank. So in Spider, your little robot buddy can take up to 2 hits from enemies and hazards, and falling into pits is of course an instant death. There are health pickups, but these are usually few and far between, so you'll want to avoid taking damage as much as possible. Now the thing is though, this is quite hard to do. It might be down to the camera being a little too close so you can't react to enemies in time. It might be due to blind jumps, which often put you into enemies that you can't see, or even projectiles coming from off screen. There's many times you'll probably take damage in this game and it's entirely your fault, but let me tell you, there's probably an equal amount of times you'll take damage due to this crap. And whether it's from hit point damage or just falling into the void, lives drain quickly in this game, and worse yet, levels don't have checkpoints. So if you die 4 minutes into a level, you are back to the beginning with your weapons gone too, which is rough to say the least. Now, to its credit, lives are generally pretty easy to come by, both by finding them in a level or by collecting 100 of these DNA tokens, which are very plentiful across the levels, but you'll need to be on your A game in this one if you want to see the end. And it's probably also worth saying a quick prayer to RN Jesus so the game doesn't spawn an enemy where you're about to jump. Now, truthfully, a lot of these issues also exist in the original Pandemonium, and I think it's just a byproduct of early 3D game design, but it is notably worse in Spider and pretty much requires you to play with extreme caution, which isn't ideal. Now, as for the presentation, I think there is a lot to like here in Spider. The graphics are a little basic, and I think they could have gone a bit bigger with the environments and locales, but it still does a good job at making you feel like you're shrunk down in a big world. I don't know if these levels that take place in computer parts are exactly to scale, but whatever, I'm here for the tiny spider fantasy, you know? I also quite like the spider model and the way it gains this silver armor whenever you acquire new weapons, and some of the bugs look pretty cool too. Love a good slug, so I do. And yeah, special shout out to the bosses and cutscenes again. These are also very well done in my opinion. Sound is another highlight too. Now, the sound effects do the job and are nothing to really write home about, but the music has some definite highlights and features a surprising amount of variety too. The music was done by Scottish composer Barry Leach, who did the music for the excellent Top Gear series of games, which is probably as famous for its music as its gameplay. So there's some definite pedigree here on the Spider soundtrack, and when it shows, it really shows. So that's Spider, and you know what? In spite of its very hard difficulty and many annoyances, I still thought this was a pretty fun time. At its core, it is a very old school traditional platformer that I think gets elevated by its bonkers premise, unique Spider gameplay, and excellent music. Is it as good as the original Pandemonium? Probably not. While that game has its own share of problems, Spider lacks a lot of the variety and I suppose finesse that game had. But for what it's worth, if you like Pandemonium and spiders, I think you'll probably like this one too. So give it a try, sure. Even with the difficulty, it should only take about an hour or two to beat, so it makes for a nice rainy afternoon game. Or, you know, just buy it for the box art. So there you are now, another volume of obscure and forgotten PS1 games in the can, and not a moment too soon, because recording these voiceovers during a heatwave is actually gonna kill me. We got to check out one of the latest releases on the console, which also happens to be one of its earliest too, a dinosaur fighting game that lets you take things to the next level by eating a goat mid-match. The #1 racing game for people who like driving tiny cars while also standing on a podium a great distance away. And finally, we have the only official video game for spiders, by spiders. It's Spider the Spider on the Spider Station 2 Electric Spiderloo. Of course, we can't finish up without assigning a ranking to each of our wheels chosen this episode. Were any of the games a must play, worth trying if you like the look of them, maybe just kinda meh, or worse still, destined for the trash pile? Well, Volume 12 selection sees Blockids making its way into the meh tier, and our remaining games, Warpath Jurassic Park, RC Day Go, and Spider the Video Game, all slotting in comfortably in the tri-tier. Blockids does one thing pretty well, and that's being a breakout clone. Unfortunately though, even with some solid ball blocking fundamentals, the game's attempts at transferring the gameplay into the third dimension with vertically stacked blocks and awkward camera angles end up being detrimental to the experience, turning what could have been an enjoyable but basic breakout clone into an oftentimes frustrating one. You can absolutely do much better than this on the console if you need your breakout fix, but I'd still say there is some fun to be had if you really need something new in the genre to quench your thirst. But as for everybody else, this one is an easy pass, even with the cute low poly dragons. Warpath Jurassic Park is, dare I say, the best 1v1 dinosaur fighting game on the planet. Sorry Primal Rage, sorry Dino Rex, Warpath is to this day the king of dinosaur fighting games. Now that's not to say it's an amazing fighting game by any means, but what Warpath does well is giving you the experience of big prehistoric beasts knocking the blocks off one another, and with a basic but functional core fighting system tying it all together. Needless to say, if you like Jurassic Park, dinosaurs, cool dinosaur facts, and eating tiny people, Warpath is a game you really can't go wrong with. As for RC Day Go, well, we have one of the console's most unique arcade racers, giving us a very bright, colourful and upbeat arcade racing experience, while also giving us a glimpse into the world of professional RC racing, from the tracks to the many parts that go into them. This is a game that melds the ideas of accessibility and simulation into a damn fun video game. Now admittedly, the lack of content and very short races does make the game pass by you at a lightning pace, and there are some elements that I would have liked to have seen fleshed out a little more that do make the game feel a little one note by the end. But if you like RC cars, top-down racers, or even just in the mood for a unique arcade experience, RC Day Go is certainly a great way to spend an hour or two. And finally, we have Spider the Video Game, a fun but very frustrating platformer that really harkens back to the challenge that we'd see in generations before it. Now unfortunately, a lot of this challenge does stem from the unfortunately close camera, off-screen enemy deaths and jank, but the experience of playing as a tiny spider armed with weapons in a cyberpunk world complete with a bitchin' soundtrack and insane plotline, you know what, I think I can forgive a few issues for that. Now that's not to say that these issues won't be a deal breaker for some of you, but I think if you can handle the difficulty and are adverse to throwing your controller against the wall, this is a nice little 2.5D platformer that I'm sure fans of the genre will enjoy. Now as always, we have to give a special thanks to the wheels chosen this episode, Brain Pulse. Many thanks for your contribution and allowing me to show off the Spider box art to people. Seriously, I can't get enough of it. If any of you lovely people would like to submit a game for the viewer selection in future volumes of the series, you can leave your pick in the comments below and I'll get it added for you ASAP. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in to another episode of the show. I'd also like to say a big thank you to all my Patreon subscribers who help make videos like this possible, including the ones you see below, and of course fan favorites like Alan Caslin, Crimson Cyclist, Dave Nolan, Doma, Globe99, Carl Winter, Moomatron, Moomin Biscuit, Trans Rights Are Human Rights, Mr. the Joshmon, and Richard Kramer, who all subscribe at the Fan++ tier. I'll be back real soon with some more wheel-based rambling Irishman content, and maybe even a video about the effect of fear, some sort of retro helix. I don't know. Anyway, thank you so much as always for watching. Make sure to take care of yourselves, and most importantly of all, don't forget to praise the wheel. See ya!